Hey everyone, welcome back to the Level Up podcast. I'm your host, Ken Rose, co-founder and CTO at OpsLevel. OpsLevel is an internal developer portal that helps engineering teams quickly ship quality software. Our Level Up podcast explores challenges, best practices, and stories from some of the brightest engineering and DevOps leaders about what it takes to build great products, teams, and companies. And today, I am so excited to welcome Rob Zuber, the CTO at CircleCi. CircleCi is one of the largest CI and CD providers on the planet, boasting a roster of thousands of customers and over 1 million users. Chances are, if you're a developer, you've used CircleCi at least once in your career, either at a previous company, maybe a future company, or through an open source project. And before his time at CircleCi, Rob is a startup veteran. As a multi-time founder, I think Rob figured out 3-time founder and 5-time CTO. And in addition to being a podcast guest, he is also a podcast host. So he has his own podcast, The Confident Commit, and I encourage all of our listeners to check that out wherever you listen to your podcast. So Rob, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm still laughing over the fact that we couldn't even put together a bio. It's a flurry of activity in a long career, and hopefully I've learned some things from that. I'm happy to talk about it. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Cheers. Why don't we just start with that point? I suspect, again, a lot of our listeners know about CircleCi, but maybe tell us a little bit about, yourself and your journey into CircleCi.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I'll try to keep it brief because, we just talked about it for 30 minutes before we started recording. But I actually didn't study computer science. I was in engineering physics specifically. And actually, a lot of that linear algebra has become very relevant in the world of ML. So, finally, I'm putting some of that to use. I had to do tensor calculus, which is kind of comical. I thought that's something I'll never use in my life. But got out of school, became rapidly fascinated with software and software building, and quickly into a startup. And I'll skip all the stories that sort of come out of that, but I've just been through many different startups in many different industries. We were just talking about physical devices and sort of consumer electronics. Did mobile, early, what we called application service providers back in the day. Now we just call SaaS. Have built data centers because that's how you had to get your product online. And so I've just been through a lot of it. Have done a ton of waterfall software delivery, like just a lot of battle scars. Lots of startups, lots of fresh ideas, lots of fun pursuing ideas, which, I'm happy to go into any of it. But I think one of the things that is really interesting out of that when you've been in the industry a long time is we talk about DevOps. We talk about, fast iterations and fast cycle times and all these kinds of things. And I think if you've more recently come into the industry, you're not really sure why everyone's talking about it, because maybe it's just the way that you work now and you've never seen the dark side, just how painful it was to deliver software in 2000, and change review boards and marketing requirements documents and product requirements documents, and if everybody signs the document, then for sure the software will be good, and just how wrong we were about all of that. And so I would say both from a company starting, what's it like to be in a small company, find product market fit, grow from there. I love that adventure, but also because of what we do at CircleCi, because of being a developer through all those years, I love what we've been able to achieve in terms of, delivering software quickly, getting feedback, knowing we're building the right thing, connecting the engineer directly to the customer or the stakeholder to really just see it firsthand. I love that evolution about software and everything that's brought us to where we are.
That's amazing. Maybe you can kind of talk a little bit about that trajectory for CircleCi. CircleCi started in 2011, and so there has been just a bunch of change in terms of how software gets built, right? Microservices, DevOps, you build it, you own it, containers, LLMs now are seemingly taking over the world. Talk a little bit about, just how you've seen software architecture evolve and how CircleCi has kind of also responded at each of those different inflection points.
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing about software engineering as a discipline. We are very uncomfortable with things staying the same, right? The thing that we love to do the most is change the way that we do everything, which is a little bit challenging for all of us as we try to, get things done. And I would say through that journey, right? From the time that CircleCi was started to where we are today and into the future, we've always been focused on the same objective, which is we have customers building products for their customers, and we want to ensure that they can deliver that stuff as quickly as possible, get feedback as quickly as possible, and be confident that the things they're delivering are good, right? And in 2011, if you look at, I joined the company in 2014, but I was around in 2011. I was doing other things, but as part of the same cycle, everything was Rails apps on Heroku, right? Everybody that understood CI and sort of jumped on, wait, I can do that as a cloud thing instead of deploying Jenkins or managing this myself. Those folks were primarily Rails developers. And, Rails at the time was blowing up. It was, that was the way that you built a product. Everything was web first in 2011. Heroku was a going concern. Cloud had established itself. And then Heroku on top of cloud as I get pushed to Heroku and now I have a running site. I don't even know how it got there. I don't understand any of the mechanics. So I can just build this product. And then within Rails, when you scaffold a Rails app, the first thing it does is spit out tests. So it was fundamentally changing the way that software developers thought about building good code. And then DHH, to his credit, is all over Twitter telling everybody you need to test, right? You need to do test-driven development. Maybe he's kind of backed off that, whatever. We don't need to have religious debates about approaches, but testing is good. And you're going to deliver software faster. You're going to find product market fit faster. It's also the days of IMVU and continuous delivery and continuous deployment really becoming a thing. That was 2009, 2010. Etsy is out there. Code is craft. Everyone is talking about this shift, and CircleCi lands in the middle of that. And everyone was like, absolutely, I need to do CI, and absolutely, I don't want to do it myself. Sign up now. I'm in. And so, I don't know of a company, well, there's probably plenty, but I'm not deeply invested in sort of part of a company and have never been that has found product market fit that fast, right? It was just perfect storm, boom, off we go. But as disclosed, software developers are fickle. And by 2014, web was secondary at best, right? Everybody was mobile. iPhone had sort of grown. Now we're into the world of actual iOS apps, not just using the browser on the phone kind of thing. And all the startups that you see that are taking off are starting either mobile first or mobile only. And it's a totally different space. That's how I ended up here, because myself and a couple other folks were building a CI/CD platform just for mobile. And so we got acquired by CircleCi because it was all part of the same problem. Every mobile developer still had a back end, right? How do I test this other piece? We said, oh, we've heard about the CircleCi thing. You should check that out. So
better together.
Sort of exactly. So we joined at that time, but that was a really big shift. And actually, one thing that is most notable to me, and I'm not sure this is 100% accurate, but I'll call it, is all the early testing tools in iOS are written in Ruby. Because all of those Rails developers were like, wait a second, what we should do now is go build mobile apps. And they showed up in the iOS community and said, what are you people doing? How do you know that any of your stuff works? So if you look at all those early frameworks, even CocoaPods was sort of the original package manager for iOS, written in Ruby. It was not the entire community, but a big part of the community coming over and influencing how do we build software. But same problem. Now I'm building a mobile app, but I still am trying to iterate quickly, get it in front of customers, get feedback, figure out, is this what matters? And then Docker, right? Containerization. Everyone's like, we go from the Rails monolith to, before we write a line of code, let's have 70 microservices. Please don't do that. We over-index always on all these things. But there's real value in breaking apart your system into components, allowing teams to work independently, all these sorts of things. And so we had to do some retooling, but our goal is the same. You're trying to ship software, you're trying to ship it quickly, and you're trying to get it into the hands of customers and find out what they think about it, right? And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you're trying to build a Rails monolith or a distributed set of Go and Rust microservices, right? Or 15 different languages if you're can't keep control of your environment. At the end of the day, you're trying to get great stuff out to your customers faster. What's interesting along that path, I think one thing that I've really noticed is increasing complexity, right? We've taken things that we understood, like the monolith, and said, this is too complex. What if we break it down into a bunch of services, and sort of buried logic in the network where we can't see it? And so part of how our product and our capabilities have evolved have been around surfacing those sorts of, interconnects with dependencies, things like that, right? So there's been a lot of shift in the how, but not the why, right? At the end of the day, we're all struggling, let's be honest, to find the fastest way to deliver high quality, high value software to our customers. A big part of that is that fast feedback loop. So we've always been about that. But then part of that is how do I partition, componentize, decouple, these core sort of software engineering principles. And then how can we as CircleCi help you through that evolution? I'll leave the AI ML like next phase because it's a whole own thing. But, at the end of the day, again, the why all the way through. It's always the same goal for us. We've just had to adapt the tooling to make sure that we're supporting kind of these trends as they shift.
I was wondering if you could talk, especially on the microservices stack, just about like complexities you maybe are uniquely positioned to see at Circle. I'm imagining you folks get to see hundreds or thousands of different organizations trying to deploy with microservices, trying to test with microservices. What are some kind of common challenges you've seen developer teams face with that?
If the goal of components is to create isolation and fast flow of change, to use the team topologies terminology, then the components need to be decoupled and independent. But what we end up seeing is people trying to test 7 different microservices simultaneously because that's the only way they can actually achieve something. And that should be a sign that your decomposition is actually not serving you, right? Like what I want when I think about decomposed systems is for each of those components to be independently testable to a very high degree. What does a very high degree mean? I don't know. We could probably debate that all day. But I should feel like I'm getting 90% of my value out of testing it independently and then putting it into the system and saying, yep, okay, it works with all these other things, right? If the very first test requires me to deploy 7 services or whatever, then that's not decoupled. That's not information hiding. It's not any of those things. It's just taking a piece of software and spreading it over the network. And so that's probably the biggest one. And then the second one is more like from a tooling perspective. I'm going to come up with 3. From a tooling perspective, I made a joke about 15 different languages or whatever. Like people, I think in a lot of engineering organizations, the selling point, microservices, you're completely independent, you can do whatever you want, misses the sort of global optimization. So I think about my team, right? Whatever engineer I am and what team I'm on, like we love this toolkit, so we're going to use that toolkit to build our stuff. And then another team's like, we're going to go way faster if we use this other toolkit, different language, different frameworks, all this kind of stuff. And that sounds great until suddenly someone wants to expand their career and move into another team, or we need to consolidate some things, or we have an incident and someone's trying to figure out what's happening across the whole system, and every single piece of the system works totally differently. And so I think the allure at the individual team level doesn't account for larger sort of system-wide optimization. And system-wide optimization is a tough problem because it's not all the way the other way, right? Everyone has to wait for some central team to do a thing, right? That's not giving you fast flow of change either. So I think teams struggle to find the right balance in there, or organizations, I would say. And then the last thing is we have created a lot of tools to support this. And this kind of leads into, or goes back to some of the things we think about from a developer tooling perspective. But there's been the rise of the platform team, at least in nomenclature. I think the nomenclature came much later than the actual rise of the practice. Yeah. And it's been a lot of, we'll manage Kubernetes for you. And then when you need to deploy your thing, here's how you write a Helm chart, versus you don't even need to know that this thing is in Kubernetes. Like, you write your software, we'll take care of the rest. And so I think that doesn't create the kind of leverage, right? When I, as an individual developer, need to understand not only like React and all my JavaScript frameworks and like my BFF that's written in Node or whatever, but also the entirety of Kubernetes and how AWS works or GCP or wherever I deploy, like, you're not actually helping me, right? I like this, you build it, you own it. is fantastic when it's about the thing that I built and own. But in order to like own it and run it in production, I also need to know everything about how like cloud infrastructure works, how Kubernetes works, how all these systems talk to each other. Like you haven't really given me a lift, you've just given me more. And one way that I've always thought about this like is in a monolith. I don't yearn for the monolith, but when you were working in a monolith, all the basic stuff was taken care of, right? How are we connecting into the database? Where's the database? How are our secrets managed? Whatever. Like someone took care of that at some point, and now I just build business logic. And then as we break into microservices, I would like, I'll call them product teams, like teams thinking about the end product that we're delivering to our customer, for those people to think about those same things. How do I think about my business logic? And if I am re-implementing, how do I connect to a database? How do I put things onto a queue? What's the messaging format that we're using to pass stuff around? Then I am becoming less effective as an engineer, because now I'm taking every engineer in my organization and asking them to understand things that used to just be understood by a few people. And it's the opposite of what we wanted with platform teams. So I feel like we're seeing this shift now, or maybe I'm just hopeful, and if I keep saying it, then we'll see it, towards product thinking in platform teams, right? Like how do we resolve that complexity and make it easier for people to deliver? Like, yes, there's the tools, right? I'm using CI/CD, I have pipelines, I have, progressive delivery, these sorts of things. But how much of that do I actually need to know? I'm a big fan of encapsulation, very slim interfaces in software design, but also in organizational design, right? And in inter-team design. What is the interface and sort of the minimal piece that I need to understand to interact with what the platform team has built, so that the platform takes care of itself and takes care of my stuff regardless of what's happening.
I remember seeing this quote, and I don't remember who made it, but it was basically all platform teams are trying to re-implement Heroku from 2011, right? Like that's the interface they should be providing for their product developers, so that, like, to your point, product developers can just focus on the business logic and not have to worry about the semantics of like, okay, where in the cloud, what region, how do network calls work, how do I debug that when things go wrong? There's all these primitives already built and ready for them to start using.
Yeah, I think that's almost exactly right. Of course, I'm finding the edge cases because I'm an engineer, right? Like, one of the things that happened with Heroku is everybody used it at the start, and then their business would scale, and they'd say, okay, I don't have enough visibility into what's happening. I need to go manage that. But what they would do is pull it out of Heroku and hire some people to do that. Like, your people are already doing that. So can they, with what they know about the system and about the goals of your software, optimize for you? And I think that's, I always talk about these thin interfaces between teams. I don't want that to be confused with teams shouldn't talk to each other, right? Like, if I am building the platform, I should not just say, here's some Kubernetes, right? And here's the CI/CD pipeline. If you push your stuff through the CI/CD pipeline, it'll work amazingly. Like, we move a lot of data around in our system, and moving data between AZs or between regions in a cloud provider has real impact on us as a business, has impact on latency and performance, has impact on cost. And so you as a platform team need to understand what I as a product engineer are trying to achieve, so that you can provide a platform that gives me the very few knobs or takes care of optimizing on my behalf. One or the other is probably fine, right? But we're going to need to talk to understand these are the really big, hard problems that we're trying to solve. Oh, here's how we can help you with that, and here's some tools we can give you where you can take the rest of it. It's not like arm's length, right? I just want the minimum amount of understanding, because ultimately that's about being able to change, right? Encapsulation allows you to change all of your stuff without me having to know about it, right? Like, it should be possible for a platform team to say, you know what, we're done with EKS. We're going to go back to ECS. And I've heard this before, right? So do I want to put tickets on the backlogs of every team in my organization to say, hey, we're switching to ECS now, you need to do your stuff differently? Or do I want to say, by the way, there's a maintenance window, we're doing this cutover, you probably don't need to know anything about it. We just want to let you know, if you get called in, you have the background context in case something blows up. I would take the latter any day. It might be a pipe dream, but I feel like that, one, software design principles around systems is something I keep talking about with folks. And two, shifting to that product oriented, like how do I actually solve your problems and make your life simpler as a product engineer? That's what I want to be doing as a platform team. I keep casting myself into each of these roles. And, I like stepping into these people's shoes.
That's good. It's a sign of empathy, I think, that you're putting yourself into those shoes.
Sure.
I'd love to ask you, like at CircleCi, you lead a team that builds tools for other developers. And I'm wondering, you also, have a team of developers building this. I'm wondering if you can talk about like any challenges or opportunities that come with that, like building a developer tool and having a developer team help with that. I guess another way of phrasing this is like, how do you think about building product at CircleCi?
Yeah, fantastic question. And a real set of opportunities and challenges. It's both. I came for the thing that I was doing before I got into CI/CD was building a clothing, shoes, and accessories marketplace. And you can probably tell by my attire, if you're just listening to this, my attire is not great. I did not know the customer very well, right? I had perceptions, but it was like focus groups and research and all this stuff all the time. And then I stepped into building CI/CD for mobile developers, having been a mobile developer for the previous, few years. And I was like, this is awesome. I don't have to ask anybody because I know exactly what problem I want solved and I know what great looks like. And I think CircleCi did well with that in the early days because our early customers were other startups building very similar things, right? But what happens over time as you expand, your customer base expands, even our own customers grew, right? We had early stage startups who IPO'd. And the concerns of public companies are different from the concerns of like 3 people in a garage. And so we were a little bit over opinionated, I would say, in the early days. That's not how you build software now. Let us tell you what your concerns are and how you should think about building software. And had to pull back from that a little bit and say, now I think of it more of if you don't have an opinion, we will happily provide one for you because that will allow you to move faster, right? If you're trying to do something brand new, if you don't have a template or a mental model, or you just want to know what good looks like now compared to maybe the last project that you kicked off a few years ago, happy to like send you down a path that makes sense to us, put some guardrails in place. But if you have some very specific needs that might be related to the regulated industry that you're in, or the way that you have set up your SOC 2 compliance, because that's a fun experience that everyone gets to go through. Like, we're not going to make it hard for you to achieve that because we're just doing you a disservice. And so that's where the transition at CircleCi, I mean, I've been here long enough that we didn't have product management when I started. It was exactly, as you said, developers building for developers. Like, we know what you need, we'll just build it. The transition to product was, okay, we need to actually collect the broader set of perspectives and find the common capabilities that will allow us to support these different perspectives. Because the other risk is you just end up customer by customer. That customer needs this, we'll build that. That customer needs this, we'll build that, and not spotting the patterns. And so our product team really invests in that, right? Like, where's the real opportunity? Like, engineers want to build everything because they think everything needs to be done yesterday, but they don't know how to get any of it done by yesterday, sort of thing. So helping understand where's the real opportunity, what really matters, and then what are the high points of leverage, right? All of these customers are asking for things that if you understand what they're saying, you can shape them into this, right? We can do this one thing that will solve all of their problems, or give them the tools to solve their problems if they're truly distinct, but we're blocking them from doing that now, versus let's build that and that and that and that and that kind of thing. And so it's an important transition that we've gone through. I mean, we have a pretty standard product management organization, but I would say our engineers are probably more opinionated about the product than they would be in a different company because they use it every day. It's part of their workflow, and they have specific problems they're trying to solve, or they have, again, blessing and a curse. Like, we do it this way, therefore we focus on that. But also, a customer said that to you. I hear what you're saying, but actually, when we think about that here, we would do it like this, sort of providing new ideas and new approaches to the PMs to kind of collaborate and work through what's going to be the best outcome for customers.
That's great. Yeah, it's. I was thinking about what you were saying also about, like, as a developer, kind of what you expect out of a CI and CD system. But as you grow, it's hard to have the same context as all your customers, right? Like, We also we went through SOC 2 compliance, and my security and compliance guy knows way more about it than I do. So if I had to opine on it, I'm not the persona anymore. And so it's important to your point, do that discovery and understand from your customers, what are their requirements and finding that common thread between them.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'd love to talk a little bit about kind of developer experience, right? Now, CI and CD is obviously one of the biggest pieces in the software development lifecycle, right? I think of it as you write some code, you get it deployed, and then you have to monitor and observe it. So that whole middle piece is all around CI and CD. So how do you kind of think about CI and CD and the role it plays in kind of having a good developer experience, and what kind of things has CircleCi done to sort of help improve developer experience?
Yeah, great question. There's kind of two big things that I think about in that. One, the experience of using CI and CD in general, right? I talked earlier about engineers being directly connected to customers, fast feedback. A big part for me personally as an engineer of what's fulfilling or gives value to me is seeing my stuff get used. I worked on a thing, I built a thing, customers appreciate it, it's providing value to them, et cetera. And I can't speak for every engineer on the planet, but I feel like there's a general leaning towards that as a sense of fulfillment. And so I think, again, going back to writing documents for months before writing a line of code, this shift in accepting that we're probably wrong, let's try the smallest possible thing, put it in front of customers. We make it possible for folks. And that shift has been very good for the lifestyle of developers. I don't know exactly what to call it, but it's just more fulfilling, in my opinion, to get direct feedback from your customers. And I don't mean surveys, but just, I can see the numbers going up and to the right. People are using it. It's working. It's faster. They're tweeting about it, whatever it might be. Right. So I think that is great. And it's one of the reasons that I love doing what we do. On the other end, there's the actual developer experience of using our product. And I think we've gone through a pretty interesting exploration here. The first version of CircleCi way back in the day, 2012 when it launched, started late 2011, launched 2012, grew from there, was very magical. But magical to the point of all frameworks where it gets you going really quickly, but then when you need to do something bigger than what the framework has offered you, it actually gets in your way, sort of thing. So that was a struggle that we went through with the product in the what now feel like the early years. But I'd been at CircleCi for a few years as we started to think about how do we give people access to do more of this, to customize more, to tailor to their needs. We have a broader range of customers. They have different needs. We used to only have one type of VM that you could run your build in. Now you can bring your own, basically, choose from hundreds of options off the shelf. You can bring your own. We do all kinds of things to customize for folks. But the thing that I keep saying about developer experience in general and developers, right? It's interesting having a developer as a customer because you think if it doesn't do what they need, they'll just build it. It's a great thing about developers, right? But the conclusion that I've come to is that developers love to tinker when they want to tinker. And when they don't, and it's that thing is not the thing I want to work on right now. I'm trying to do this, that other thing, you're talking about platform teams or our product or any developer product, they want it to be the simplest possible. They just want it to work, right? Don't make me think, don't make me read the docs, don't make me click more buttons than I have to, whatever that might be, right? And in that, it's like we operate in two mindsets. You know what I mean? On one hand, I am just a consumer, right? I don't even want to think about how your thing works because right now my brain is already thinking about how my thing works. So if I have to stop what I'm doing and go invest in figuring out your tool, and I now that I've thought about this, I see it in my own behavior, in the way that I look at other developer tools, right? I love that quick, magical, oh wow, that was easy. And it got me the thing I needed, and now off I go. And so as a product, we straddle this balance of how do we make it as easy as possible for you to do the right thing out of the gate that's going to get you going. But anywhere you turn where you say, that's not good enough, I have a custom need that's available to you. And so that's it's been a journey, I guess, to get to that point of like, what is developer experience? Like, what do developers value, right? And I'll watch developers spend an entire weekend, right, when they're not even working, building a little side project, learning how to use Arduino or whatever. Like, hey, what'd you do on the weekend? Oh, I built a pinball machine, whatever. It's just like, really? You spent your whole week at work writing software, then you went home and did electronics and software and whatever. But like, yes, because it wasn't this thing, right? It's like, it's different. I'm learning something new. I'm expanding my mind, whatever. And like tons of engineers do that. They explore all these different spaces just because it's fun and interesting. They like to learn. But when I'm at work and I'm trying to get like customer value into the hands of my users or whatever, and you're asking me to stop doing that and go off and figure out some other tool just to make the next step, like I feel that weight. Like there's this exhausted exhale of just, here we go. Down the rabbit hole of documentation and how does this thing work and how do I make and like maybe I learned something interesting along the way, but I wasn't in that I want to learn something new right now mode. I was in, I want to get this thing out the door and now I've hit a roadblock. And so being in that moment and just being magical, oh wow, that was really easy. I got that problem solved, off we go, is great. And saying, oh, this is going to be really fun for you. Look at all this stuff you could tinker with. Here's a bag of tools that you could use to build the thing you need instead of here's the thing you need, is not always a winner. But it's taken a while to find that kind of divide and even the persona of a single human, right, who switches between those modes.
I really like that, especially that term magical, right? It's kind of like fast time to value, good defaults, but an extensibility when you need it. But if you don't, we give you the happy path out of the box.
Yeah.
We have a few minutes left, and I'd love to ask you just one final kind of question in and around AI, right? Because AI is kind of having AI and ML and LLMs are having their moment in the sun, and so I'm wondering if you could talk about kind of trends you're seeing in terms of how software gets written. Look, I was a classically trained software developer, if that's even a term. Like you write code, it's deterministic, you test it, you put it through CI and CD. Now you have LLMs that will give you non-deterministic output, right? How do you think about testing that? How do you think about kind of like the impact that AI and ML is going to have on development in the future?
Oh my goodness.
I know this could be like a whole other podcast episode.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much. It's so fascinating. And I think there's like three big buckets that we think about. And one is just how do we use it internally to, for all of our processes. I'll skip that. Not super interesting. Everyone's trying to do it. But of the other two, what can we do to help developers who are building systems like this? And then how do we enable these kind of capabilities in our own product, right? Like there are things that we can do to make what you're already doing inside of CircleCi easier and faster. We launched this error explainer. So if you have an error, like a giant stack trace, you click a button and it'll summarize for you what the problem is and how to fix it. We've even taken that and in the lab, if you will, built a self-healing pipeline. So we actually just fix it for you because we have all your tests. We fix the code until it works. And then we say, hey, yeah, there was a problem, but now it works. Like now all your tests pass. We don't rewrite your tests because that feels a little shady. But anyway, so that's like what we can do just to use AI to make the developer experience better. But then we think about more to your problem, like how do I think about building a product that we refer to as AI enabled, right? My product is not an LLM. My product is a CI/CD platform, right? Your product is an internal developer portal sort of thing. Am I capturing that right? It's a good summary. So like, how do that's probably a fascinating space to apply AI enabled features, right? You're not building an LLM, but you're building, hey, here's visibility. Here's what you want to know about your system right now. Like, can I take a whole bunch of data, hand it to an LLM and say, give me a summary of what this is, right? That would be fantastic if it was right. So how do you know if it's right? Like, how do you know if shipping it is good enough? So when we look at that problem, the good news from my perspective is there's a lot of smart people looking at the non-deterministic test, like generally they're referred to as evaluators, but like what does it look like to check the output of an LLM and determine, yes, this is good enough. And good enough is some combination of accurate, that's obviously important, but also, unbiased, not including, hateful language, like lots of things that people are concerned about because you have like a wide open spectrum. And I think that to me is taking very classic, CI/CD, if you will, and applying a different testing pattern, which we've already shown how this works inside of CircleCi. We're putting out a bunch of content on that to help people understand it, but it's a very natural progression. And I think it's taking, AI/ML, which is having its own sort of moment as you described, but it feels like the transition right now is towards the AI-enabled product, right? Okay, we figured out how to make this stuff work. We have the general purpose toolkit. How do we take that and solve specific end user problems, right? And my problem might be what's happening in my system right now. I don't want to click on all the different buttons. I want the summary that says everything looks good except for this looks kind of interesting. You might want to go check that out, right? And so what's fascinating about that from a building perspective is that's getting built by a software engineer who's making a call to a model or whatever that might be, and it's probably just a generic like a foundation model or something. B, that software engineer is very familiar with most of the tools they need. So, okay, how do I write a test that tests for accuracy within a range as opposed to 2 + 2 is 4, right? And within software, we've also built most of the other tools that will help us solve for these kinds of problems, like progressive delivery, Canary, like how do I do a slow rollout of a change? We have an upgraded version of the model. Great, let's deliver that to 10% of customers, compare the metrics, decide to roll it forward or roll it back. Like these are all very standard problems that we've solved in software delivery. And we can either decide that we need a whole new set of ways of doing things for AI and ML, or we can take 95% of what we have, which is totally perfect for the job, and figure out the last 5%, and then just get back to delivering great customer experiences. So I do think, you mentioned classically trained software engineer, like we need to get comfortable with non-determinism, but I think we all did a little bit of stats. Like even if you didn't do tensor calculus in your undergrad, like you at least did some statistics, right? Like we know how to optimize for trade-offs, right? That's a thing that we do. We might not do it in an individual function, but we do it when we choose resource classes and how much we're going to spend on our software delivery pipelines, how much we're going to spend on our cloud infrastructure, when we make decisions about what database we're going to use. Like we make trade-off decisions all the time. And I think the other really analogous thing is like SLOs, right? We spend a lot of time looking at, I'm not going to be 100%. Like maybe 2 + 2 is 4 100% of the time, but I'm going to get errors. I'm going to get network hiccups. I'm going to get latency in my system. I'm going to produce bad results every once in a while for whatever reason. And I'm making conscious decisions about, is this acceptable at 98%, 99%, 99.9%? Like what is acceptable to my customers? And that typically decided with other stakeholders is really like a very fundamental concept to me around engineering, where we sit down with everyone and say, we can move up the threshold, but moving up the threshold costs more. Right? So what are we willing to pay as a business, and what are our customers willing to accept? Right? So if I talked about foundation models, right? I use a foundation model. No one's going to build one other than like the 3 massive players, right? But like I use a foundation model and I get 80% accuracy. Are we comfortable with that? It seems a little low. Okay, so then maybe we'll do RAG, right? Retrieval augmented generation, I think is. So that massively increases the context of my request. So it drives up cost, but improves accuracy. Are we comfortable with that? Do we need to go down another path? But we would only do that. The great thing about the foundation model is I could put out the MVP tomorrow, right? Like you could probably build this thing. You probably have built this thing I just described, but you could build it if you hadn't in a day. Dump a bunch of data into GPT-4, whatever, get back an answer and put it in front of customers and see what they think, right? And then you'd say, oh yeah, that's great, but it's not accurate enough. Next step. That's great. Now it's accurate, but it's too expensive. Okay, can we fine tune a model? Can we use a lower grade model, et cetera? Like now we're just into cost optimizing. Like this is true engineering work, right? Like the ML training part, super interesting. Now we're taking those pieces and building them into product and doing true engineering work.
I really like that take, actually. Like it's looking at non-determinism. Non-determinism doesn't mean random. It's a distribution on correctness and accuracy. There's so many other places in engineering that we're used to those distributions. To your point around like SLIs or cloud infra costs, that it's analogous. We can make a trade-off between investment and kind of, in this case, the optimization metric is correctness or accuracy of the output.
Yeah. I mean,
I really like that.
It's engineering. We know how to do it, right? We may have forgotten a little bit if we got focused on deterministic functions, but we totally know how to do this.
That's awesome. Well, Rob, before we wrap up, I always like to ask guests, what is your favorite music to listen to when you're working?
Oh my goodness. When I'm working, this should be an easy question, except I listen to literally everything. I will say at the moment, the Marcus King Band. I'll leave that with you.
I'll throw it on my Spotify playlist afterwards.
Sick guitar player. That's basically, I'm a guitarist, and he's got this very bluesy R&B. I mean, the guy's ridiculous. I think he's super young. Like, it's nuts. Anyway, so that's my thing at the moment. But by tomorrow it'll be something else.
Okay. I'll capture it while it's here today then. And what's the best way for people to follow you on social media?
I'd say LinkedIn at the moment is where I'm trying. Like some of these things we've been talking about, I've been trying to post about. And I think that's where a lot of this conversation is happening. So I'm, Rob Zuber on LinkedIn, not really hard to find, and trying to have a little bit of this discourse there because the stuff's moving so fast. And of course, my podcast, but you can't really speak back to me on my podcast unless someone wants to be a guest, and then hit me up, like find me, and I'm probably interested.
Awesome. Well, we will include links to both your LinkedIn and the podcast in the show description below. And everyone feel free to follow Rob there. Today we talked about developer experience, developer tooling, and ML's impact on software development. So Rob, again, it has been absolutely great having you on the show. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Thanks for having me. It's been awesome.
Yeah, and to all of our listeners, thank you for making it to the end of another episode. If you have any topics or guests you would like to see on the show, feel free to send us an email at levelup@opslevel.com. We'll see everybody next time. Happy building. Bye-bye.